This morning we're going to be working on the beginning portions of the MVC Music Store assignment. In order to begin, you are going to want to download the tutorial PDF. This is a step-by-step tutorial developed by Microsoft, good half decade ago or so. I think the date on it is 2011, if I remember correctly. I have a copy that I've already downloaded right here on my machine. Give me a second to pull it up on screen. And just want to make sure I'm also, I guess, looking at the right version. You know what? I'm going to pull down right from the website here. And I really don't want to look at it through my browser. I really prefer to use Acrobat, so I'm just going to drop it on my desktop here. Close this tab, and then pull it up directly from here. Oh, of course, right back to the browser. Okay. Let's just drop to the desktop and find it. Okay. So hopefully you guys have this up on screen too. I mean, you can follow along with what I'm putting up on the screen, but I'm going to be mostly looking at code in the screen, I think. But I am stepping through this page by page all the way through. If you actually go all the way to the end of the document, you're going to see that it's 130 some pages total of instructions. Now, granted, there are some like title pages and indexes and a lot of screenshots and stuff. And it might seem pretty daunting to go through that many pages, but it's really not that bad. All right, so I'm going to jump all the way up to the top of the PDF. And the guy is basically going to give you a little bit of a description here, of which I'm going to just read to you for starters. It says, the MVC Music Store is a tutorial application that introduces and explains step-by-step how to use ASP.NET MVC and Visual Web Developer for web development. We'll be starting slowly, so even if you're just starting out, you'll be fine. Now, you guys already have a good wealth of experience, both with working with Visual Studio and with working with ASP.NET, so you're really not coming into it blind. So some of the early steps are going to kind of be repeat and reinforcement of key MVC concepts and how to build applications. And then when we get to the latter stages, we're going to start to do some more sophisticated things. But all of it is there step by step, and there's no reason why you can't go all the way through this. All right, so the application we'll be building is a simple music store. There are three main parts to the application: shopping, checkout, and administration. And we're going to build all three of those. So they have a little bit of an example here of what it'll look like. And in just a moment, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up on screen one that I was working on. I think it was this past summer. I think that's the one I have saved. It's not complete, but it's like 80% of the way there, just so you get an idea of like what we're going to be working on and how it's going to behave. But the objective really is to build a website that has a look and feel like the one you see here. It's pretty simplistic. You'll be able to locate certain music selections and then add them to your shopping cart and check out. And then you'll also have the mechanism where administrators can log in and configure and control things. So it's kind of interesting in that regard. All right, so here's some more of the screens that you'll be looking at. So you're going to build screens that look like all of these. And if you think about when you do like e-commerce, all the different types of screens that you encounter, I mean, they're all different and they all have some similarities. We all know how a shopping cart works, I'm assuming. Right, so we don't really need the explanation. Create some login screens. Creating new accounts. Putting in shipping info. All right, so this gives you kind of that overview. So the first step is we're going to create a new project, but before we do that, I do want to just give you a brief glimpse of what it looks like. Now, I was reviewing what framework we used to build it with. And what we used in the summer was MVC 4. And there was a reason for it. I can't tell you off the top of my head what that reason was, but that's what we chose. Although here in the tutorial you're going to see that they used MVC 3, which is the prevalent platform at that time. And really 3 and 3.5 were really big at that time. Right now 4.5 is still the big one that's out there. 5 is really gaining a lot of foothold, and 6, is kind of fresh. It's as fresh as Visual Studio 2015 is, which is basically like 6 months in terms of public availability. All right, I'm going to jump over to Visual Studio where I already have the project open. And when I open up the project, it'll open up just like this, and you can see a number of different folders here, including the typical ones that you're used to seeing, like the models, controllers, the views, the content, app data. Yeah, I don't need you to do this part. Okay, I'm just showing you a version of it that's most of the way through. That's what you're seeing right now. All right, so in order to take a look at this, I'm going to just go ahead and launch the application so it comes up in my screen. You can see my index page is very plain, and as you're building the application initially, that's what it's going to look like. That's the look of it. All right, and one of the things you'll do when you get to this website is you'll probably click on the store link. You'll see all the categories, and of course I'm probably drawn to this category the most, so I'll just click on that one. And you can see they have a bunch of different record albums listed. No, I didn't type these in. These are part of the assets that are provided with the project, just so you know. I wouldn't want to do that. And since we were listening to Iron Maiden this morning, let's click on it here and add it to the cart. So you can see I'm able to bring up a listing for the album. There is no album artwork in here, but if you were really doing an application, you'd probably go through and create thumbnail versions and large screen versions and all sorts of things. And one thing you can do is click the Add to Cart button. You can see it drops it in. And if I want, I can go back to the store and maybe change my genre a little bit, because that's a good combination. And add that to the cart. And then I decide, what the heck am I thinking? I can go ahead and remove it from the cart. And you can see some of the real simple interactive things that are present. But these are the kind of things that we're used to when we go to a site where we're buying things. This is the kind of functionality that's anticipated, really. All right. Eventually, there'll be probably like a checkout screen. You can see I didn't get that far. But that's one of the things that you'll be building. And then there's also an admin login, and frankly, I don't even remember how to log in. I mean, I could probably anticipate that it would be something like maybe login. No, that's not it. But I could look it up and find it. But you can get in. You can authenticate. You can add content, edit content, change prices, inventory levels, all that kind of stuff. So that's a real rough view of what the music store looks like that you will be working on. All right. So I think that nice little preview. And you can see you end up with lots of different files. Lots of different models, lots of different views, and these are all things that you guys have played with. And you saw the application up on screen. It doesn't even look that complicated, but you can see how many files we have sitting here doing all the work. And we do have, for example, like these views, which are the CS/HTML files. And notice how all of them are indexed. Right? And that's part of what helps to leverage those clean URLs in MVC. That's a technique. And lots of C# files. Some of them are models. So for example, if we were to look at the album model, you can see here how they set it up. Notice all the sets and the gets. Notice also all the little directives and square brackets for helping to build things and generating error messages and the like.
Does your route thing?
Oh yeah. You know what? Let's hold on that right now. I mean, we can dig into all these files. I'm just trying to give you like a really quick overview. All right, let me hit the stop button here, and I'm going to go ahead and close this solution. And let's pull up the first set of instructions. For right now, these will come up on my screen here. Find the right version of Acrobat. All right. Now, there is the capability here, and they have a link here to the website where this came from the people that originally developed it. So you can go there if you want. You can also go to the Microsoft website. I think I have links in the assignment that would take you to either place if you're so interested. Notice that when they were working on this, the tool that they were using back then is Visual Web Developer 2010 Express. Okay, so they were working off of Visual Studio 2010. 2012 also had a web version. It was called Visual Studio Visual Studio 2012 for Web Express or something like that. And a lot of textbooks that you get would offer that disk for free because it's a free product. It still is free if you want to use that tool. They've eliminated those versions now, so with 2013 and 2015, those tools are just kind of built into Visual Studio, and they don't have it as a separate download. One of the ways that you trigger being in web mode, for those of you not aware, is that you go to your Tools menu, Import Export Settings, and I know I've shown this to you before, but I'm going to click on Reset All Settings. I really don't care to save my settings, not a big deal. And then you go into Web Development mode. A lot of our Visual Studio environments by default are set either for C# or Visual Basic development. So one thing you might want to actually do is before you go working is to check to see what mode you're in. Because especially with these machines that you're using here that come from the school that are deep frozen, chances are that is your development mode. So just by very simply going through that process, and let me repeat that process. You go to Tools, Import Export Settings, Reset All Settings. If you were working in a situation where your settings persist, you could actually export your settings. So you can set up workspace layouts like multi-screen, my Solution Explorer is here, my code's over here, all your stuff is in different spots. You can actually save that. Not only save it, export it, and import it into other machines. So like if you work at home all the time, and you have a certain layout that you like that works great with your monitors, you can save that as a profile and then go to a different Visual Studio and pull it in and have it do the exact same thing. But what we're interested in here, we're going to do a reset. You want to save your stuff, go for it. And then come down here and choose Web Development. Notice they have a code-only version 2, which takes away the design views. You don't need to do that. In some cases, the design views are quite helpful. Just choose Web Development and then click Finish. And then all that really does is it resets all your tool bars and palettes to the default for that development mode. And it also helps to ensure that as we're all working together, if we're all in the same mode, we'll see the same screens. So I think it's helpful. Okay, the first step is going to be, folks, well, file new project. But let's read their instructions real carefully here. It says you can follow along step by step or download the completed application from, so you can actually download a completed version to see what it's supposed to look like. But always be careful with that because as you're building, don't expect that the incremental steps will look like the finished product. Right? All right, they tell you what tools that you can use. And then notice here that if you are using these express versions of Visual Studio 2010 or 2012 or any of those like web-only tools, that in order to do any database interactions, you would also have to download a separate SQL Server component that we don't have to do because we're using the full-blown product, right? But if you were using 2010 or 2012 Web Express or whatever they want to call it, then you need SQL Server as a separate download. So that's going to give you the heads up right away that we are doing work with data models and with database interactions. So all that will be happening. Now, a tool that they're mentioning here is a tool that you probably have encountered maybe a little bit, and that's Microsoft's Web Platform Installer. I'm going to doubt that this link works. I'm going to click it just to see. Okay, well, I guess it still works. That's not where I would go looking for it. In fact, if you ever are looking for that tool, you just Google Web Platform Installer, and it'll probably take you to something that looks more like this. And what this allows you to do, in essence, it's a standalone piece of software. It's separate from Visual Studio, but it installs components that either improve the capabilities of your web server or your applications or your authoring environment. And in some cases, you'll discover that you need certain tools in order to do the work. We shouldn't have the need to really install anything here, if my memory serves correct, but if we do, this will guide us. All right, so I'm going to save you the speech on what is MVC, right, because we just kind of did that before. But it's kind of interesting to read their description. It says it gives you a powerful patterns-based way to build dynamic websites that enable clean separation of concerns, that gives you full control over markup for enjoyable, agile development. Includes many features that enable fast, TDD-friendly. What's TDD? It's not ADD. Those of you that are still paying attention. No, that's kind of an interesting. What TDD stands for is test-driven development. Do you guys remember in Web 2 we do those like things when we run the like QUnit tests, right? That's like a big thing in development is that you write your application so that you can write test scripts to see if they work before you deploy them. And that's really important in like, large development environments when you're working with teams, is that you write a piece of code and then you have somebody else write a piece of code to test your code before you take that code and give it to somebody else to add it to part of the project. Right, so that's the point of that. Creating sophisticated applications using the latest web standards, and your tools are free. All right. All right, so what they do here is they go through and they make sure that you have all your tools. So if you were using these old tools, you would not only need to get the authoring environment, you would also need to make sure you have the MVC3 tools, and you also have to make sure that you have the SQL Server Compact Edition. Once again, not a concern for us. All right, so assuming all your stuff is installed properly, then you can go ahead and you can choose your new project. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to say new project. Notice we're not doing new website, right? Maybe we were doing earlier on. And the template they want us to select now, they are pointing out MVC3 here. And I told you that last summer we went with MVC4. I'm going to let you make your own choice. I'm going to choose MVC4. So if you want to follow along with me, choose that. I had people last time that went ahead and chose MVC 4.5, didn't have any issues. I had people, I think, that chose MVC 5 that had some issues that they were able to resolve. There were resolvable issues. Usually it's like adding a component or tweaking a setting. So if you feel brave, go for a newer version. You want to play it safe, go for 3 or 4. But we are shooting for ASP, MVC3, web application with C#. So new C# MVC for web application. Now, I also want you to be very clear on the fact that your MVC web application version, the MVC version, is different than the .NET version. It's a different thing. The .NET, remember, is the underlying infrastructure that Microsoft has in place for compiling code regardless of whatever language was used in Visual Studio. If you did C# or C++ or Visual Basic or F# or whatever other language they support, it all will get compiled through .NET using that version of the framework in order to become something that can actually run on the server where it's going to execute. What would drive a decision here is knowing what your server is running. So if you are targeting a web server and you know your web server supports 4.5, then you should use it. No. It's not something you're going to change on the fly. Well, okay, I shouldn't be so succinct with my no. You could if you want. Does that mean it's a smart move? It might be. If your application's not that complicated, it might work just fine. More likely, though, you might have some differences that might break a lot of things. You might spend a lot of time cleaning it up. The general rule of thumb is whatever you started with, stick with it. So I'm going to leave that alone.
So you wouldn't want them migrating to an older server?
I wouldn't say that either. The truth is the answers are complicated. The easiest and wisest path is to choose one level for MVC based on what you're going to have lots of different criteria, and a different level for your .NET framework. But .NET framework in particular is very sensitive to the fact of what your server is going to run. Most Windows web servers, you can be pretty safely assured at this day and age, are going to be running ASP.NET 4.5. That's a pretty safe bet. I certainly would be super cautious about doing MVC 6, because most of them, even brand new implementations of IIS, often do not run 6. It has to be flipped on consciously. So that you got to tread with caution. All right, so I'm choosing MVC 4, .NET Framework 4.5. This is my choice. I'm going to go ahead and name it something meaningful. I'm calling mine MVC Music Store. And then I'm also going to find a location that's going to persist and make sense for me. People using school machines that are deep frozen, keep in mind that if you save it on the C drive, things will disappear after a reboot. So save it somewhere else. This is where I'm going to save mine. I'm going to save it in the root of this folder. I know already in advance that it's going to create another folder inside of here. All right, we do want a solution. And in this case, I am going to leave the box checked for create directory for solution. I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, everybody's with me. Make sure your language is C#, MVC4, .NET 4.5. All right. Now we're going to have some more screens to choose from. And here we're going to go back to the tutorial just to make sure that we choose the right things. So we're going to choose an empty template. We're going to choose Razor for the view engine. That's something that you should be comfortable with at this point. And HTML5, and I don't think that's even an option anymore, but maybe it is. So Razor, empty, HTML5, I'm assuming is automatic. Now, if you were interested in doing test-driven development, you would check the box to create the test components right up front. You can add them later, but if you know that you're going to do that from the outset, here's your opportunity to do that. Okay, larger projects with large teams and usually in enterprise settings, that's going to kind of be a given.
That just makes more debugging or creates an area for more shared things.
No, it creates a special part of the project that allows you to write code that will test your code. That's what I was talking about before. Remember in Web 2 when we were doing the Q unit testing? Like you created your pages, and then you created separate files whose job it was to make sure that your pages work correctly. And then would give you either positive results or negative results. And that's the point of this, is creating the infrastructure for being able to do that in advance. All right, I think all of our settings are correct. So let's just go ahead and say, okay. You guys noticing that you can do a Facebook application? Yeah. Yeah. And that's Visual Studio 2012. Visual Studio 2015's got a lot more stuff like that that has like pre-built little tools. All right, you guys should be comfortable with this whole thing at this point where you can see the complete set of folders that this generated automatically for our project. Now, one spot I do want to point you to early on before we do any like coding is go ahead and click on this properties listing up here, and I don't know if you've had a chance to explore this much. And then if you actually double click and expand it, and you can also expand it here if you want to see what the actual file looks like. And you'll see that what this contains within it, the C# file, is a thing called assembly info. And an assembly is basically kind of like a way of identifying machine code, is really the best way to say it, where this is information that's going to get embedded into the application itself at compile time. So the name of the application, see the copyright date, like if I wanted to put in, you know, and it's not really that silly, it's actually a pretty real thing, but this stuff would get embedded into the application. It also gives the application a unique ID, and then you can write in all sorts of comments. You can put in your version numbers manually, and all that stuff gets embedded into the application, into the header components of the compiled code. The properties window, going back to that, is kind of interesting too, because here's a spot where you can see a lot of different settings for your project, and just on the main application tab here on the side, notice that right away, like, oops, did I select 4.5? I meant, and you can go in here, I haven't done any work yet, right? And this will change it. So you do have an opportunity to change some things. And if you haven't had a chance to really explore, you're noticing that you can also target certain platforms depending on the kind of development work you're doing. Now, we're not writing a Windows application or a console application. We're just writing code. So spots where you can change the names for things. I mean, you should explore these screens. You can figure out where your stuff is going to. if you knew that you were, outputting to a 32-bit or 64-bit machine, you could control it there. Usually you don't touch these things. But lots of different spots where you can put in some settings. Now, if you were looking to build an application, and especially build an application that's going to be live deployed, maybe even in the process of building it, you can actually come into some of these spots like right here, and you can create some settings that would allow you to push your functioning application directly out to the live application that's already running. And you can do that intrinsically in the product. A lot of big IDEs have that capability. So it's like you already have something that's out there and deployed, right? It's running, and then you're in the code tweaking it. And you do your test-driven development. Here's one of the reasons why you do test-driven development. Is I just wrote this new piece. Let me throw some code at it. It's all passing. It's all working. And now that one file is fixed, now I can push that file up to the live application. I can do that directly within Visual Studio. I don't have to even FTP it. It just does it. The stuff that we're doing, we're using a built-in development server to get the stuff to work, right? Visual Studio just kind of does it all in the background, does database in the background. It's kind of like hands-off. But in a real deployment environment, what's going to happen is you're going to be working with real databases, probably on a different machine, real web servers, probably on a different machine, and you have the capability to push out to those devices. And there's a different level of complexity, of course, that comes with that. That's not your concern right now. Your concern is to get this application to work. And chances are, in a large environment, you'll have people that are specialized in those particular tasks. You might become one of those people at some point. All right, so those little components. Those are good to know. Sure, I'll save it. And I'm going to collapse that one back down. All right, so there, the author here is kind of, doing the same thing that I kind of intrinsically do, I guess, at this point, is kind of giving you a little tour of the architecture of the site, showing you folders. Some of these folders are empty. So content, I don't even see a content folder. Yeah. All right. So I'm just going to, fair warning right now, I might end up changing my mind and going back to MVC 3. We'll find out. Okay. All right. So you're telling me I should just backtrack right now and do it? Okay. Yeah. Yeah, it'd be easy to step back and recreate the steps. What page are we on right now? Yeah. The worst thing that's going to happen is we step back and do all the steps. I'm talking a lot over them right now. Let's find out what happens. I'm not ready to jump ship yet. Okay? I'm right there with you. All right. So they show you all the different folders and what are typically contained in them. So you guys should have learned this stuff already, controllers and views and models. And then the content folder, this is where they're putting images, CSS, and any other static content. So that's what's supposed to be there. Obviously, scripts folders will hold things like JavaScript. Controllers, we've learned controllers are kind of like, the traffic signal, right? You get there, and you try to figure out which way you're going to go. If you stop, you go. You turn left, you turn right, which path you're going to take. And the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to add a controller. And the way that you guys do that, and you can see what they're doing here, is you just go right to the controller folder and give it a right click and then add a controller. All right, we will have a set of instructions here, so I'm going to see if I can kind of side by side it here a little bit. I'm looking for my Visual Studio here and I'm not seeing it. That's not it. And the reason I'm not seeing it is because it's in a dialog box, basically. All right, so let's just make sure we make the right choices. The first thing they want is they want it called Home Controller, and that's a pretty typical name. They want us to choose an empty controller, I'm assuming. And that's something we should talk about as well. There's lots of different types of controllers. And you can see here they chose empty API controller, yet the screen here shows empty controller. So now the question is which? Right, these are the questions that you're going to run into. So let's see if I can jog my memory here. And I'm going to choose MVC controller. Now, you might ask, why do they have this one as the default? Because this is the more modern standard. And if you've noticed in this particular unit or section folder in our course, how I also have a little exercise on Web API, and that's to help cover that concept. So, because that is the modern approach. Web API, if you guys remember, is one of those new APIs bundled in with HTML5. That really is kind of the way to go these days in many capacities. And I think our next step is just to click Add, I assume. Not too many other choices to make. All right, and then you can see that it creates a C# file in there, and by default it adds an index method. And then we can just see that the kind of stuff that it threw in looks identical, hasn't changed over the years. All right, so the one thing they want us to do to start with is they want us to throw a little return statement into the home controller. So instead of just returning a view, we're actually going to return a snippet of text. Oh, thank you. You're right, because because we're not returning an action, we're returning a string. All right, that is. All right. Yeah, it needs to be lowercase because that's a data type. Capital S is a class. It's different. And it can work, actually, but that's a separate story. All right. Go ahead and do a Control S to save, just to make sure everything's compiling correctly. All right. And then, they're showing you stuff that, you guys already know, so it's not to belittle it. But they want you to go ahead and hit that play button. Launches the internal development server. And it should, by default, bring up the message that we just created. So hopefully you are successful so far. Yeah, my machine might be a little faster than yours. Okay, so I'm gonna move on to the next set of instructions here while you guys are waiting for yours to boot up. Actually, I'm gonna relaunch that again, and I just kind of want to show you the URL. Notice that the URL has no appendages to it because this is default. We're going to the home controller. And the thing that responds to index, the basic page, is this message. There's no appendages to that URL. Now we're going to add another controller. This time it's going to be a store controller. So once again, right-click, add controller. Call it store controller. I believe they want us to keep this empty as well. And that is the case. So let's just go ahead and click add. All right, you know why I got that message? You guys didn't even see it? Because the application's running. If you don't believe me, delete it and do it again. And hopefully you shouldn't get the error message this time. Okay. Remember, don't fly the panic flag immediately. It took me a while, it took me quite a while to figure out, why am I getting this? Nobody else is getting it. Yeah, well, it's running. All right, now they need us to do a little bit more coding, I think. And frankly, for my money, the thing to do is to actually copy the code. Don't type it in. And this is going to go into the store controller. Now, if you look really carefully at the code we have so far, we are going to replace the index method. So I'm just going to come here and copy all of this. And it should paste in just fine. Now notice what's happening here in terms of the methods inside of this file. So we have an index method. That's what happens when we will bring up, when we ask for the store controller. So the URL is going to say whatever the website name is, /store. And then we will look for particular methods, either index, browse, or details. And then we'll request any one of those methods by appending it to the URL. So musicstore.com/store/browse would trigger this method. In this case, it'll just put a message on the screen. For right now, they're all just going to put messages on the screen. All right, Control S to save. And then the trick is, and this is the part I'm trying to explain, is run the project again and then append these items to the URL to test each one of those methods. So I'm going to go ahead and run it. All right. You do have to make sure the project's running, though, before you refresh. So I'm going to trigger the server to run. All right. So there's our default home controller index. Now we're going to append to it store, capital S. And then we're going to add to it browse. What was the other one? Details? So all of the methods are working. Now remember, with the store one, since that method's called index, I don't have to list it. Right. But notice how it indicates the controller, and then it indicates the method in the controller that we're running. And then if you get to the point where that method requires parameters, like 1, 2, 3, that's where your parameter goes. Or parameters, plural. Makes for clean URLs. Little magic that's happening in the background. But one of the benefits of MVC. And And it's a cool benefit. It really is. Different approach. We're not looking at files anymore. All right. Now it looks like they want us to go in and set up a little bit of something more inside this browse area. And so the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to put in some arguments. Okay, let's press stop. Guarantee you guys will do that often. And I'm setting it up so that I can pass a string into the browse area. Additionally, we're going to change the code inside there. We're going to add a little bit to it. And what we're going to do is we're going to take that string that's being passed in, and it's going to get inserted into and concatenated to a statement that will get encoded as HTML, and then will be stored in message. And then what we will return is the message. Where's the argument coming from? The URL that's being requested. Whether the user types it in manually, or it's hard-coded into a link, or it's automatically generated by a different piece of code, somehow we're generating a URL that's going to have an additional piece of information on it. Now, okay, so the question here, and it's kind of nice that he has it in here, it says we're using the HTTP utility HTML encode method to sanitize the user input. This prevents users from injecting JavaScript into our view with a link like this. So really what's going to end up happening, notice the statement here. This is the part we really want. But what they're saying is people could hard code in a piece of script and do malicious things on your website or things you didn't originally design. So there are utilities that prevent that from happening. And this is kind of considered kind of like a de facto mode now, but there was a time where the coders had to think about it real carefully. All right, so now what they want us to do is something like this. So go ahead, save your work, run the application, append to the URL, and then if you need a point of reference, go back to the book for a second, and notice that they're putting in question mark, genre, disco. So question mark, disco. Now, we don't really have anywhere to pull information from right now, right? Really all we're doing is we're taking that disco, we're passing it into the method is using it to add to a string, and then it's coming back to us, just so that we can see that that controller is actually working and doing something. That's what the code looks like. Receives the string, runs the method, returns the message, puts it up on our screen. All right, now they want us to change the details code. So once again, I'm going to grab that code there. Back to Visual Studio, I'm hitting stop. I'm going to replace the code inside of details. Save it. I'm assuming we're going to be running it again. So I'm hitting run. Oh, there were build errors. Oh. Oh yeah, you know what the build error is? I did not put this in there. Yeah, but I didn't do this. All right, so once again, let's hit the button. And they want us to do something like this. Store, details, and then what? /5. See a little bit of a difference here? We're trying to show you two different things. And the difference is this is a hard-coded value that's being passed. With the other one, we were actually doing a query. Really, the intent is to do a query. Controller, method, argument, parameter, whatever you want to call it. It's clever, really. It's a kind of a neat way to work. Now, it doesn't mean like the user is going to be necessarily knowing to even type that in. Maybe the only part they remember is store. You know, but a lot of the code and the URLs is often generated dynamically through the things that you're doing or the links that are pre-created or links that are generated from output of a database. All right, go ahead and hit stop. All right, and it looks like we're at a logical stopping point here. So the recap is we had a new project, checked out our folder structure, learned how to run it, created a couple of controllers, added methods, and we're able to get it all to work. Okay, that's a good place to stop. This video will end here, and we will stop for lunch.